So our next speaker is Ms.Chathurani, and actually I've had the privilege of working alongside with her also. She is a young electronics and biomedical engineer who graduated from University of Moratuwa in 2019 and has been working with SEBI projects for over 2 years as a research assistant and engineer. Her main undergraduate research project was on the development of readout circuit for a high-resolution, high-density pressure sensor matrix for analyzing diabetic foot conditions. While other projects are in the areas of electronic design, signal processing, requirement analysis for biomedical products, and developing educational programs for BME undergraduates. As you can see, our speaker has a lot of exposure in a wide range of biomedical products, biomedical engineering products. Her main work involves in plantar pressure measurement and analysis conducted for validation of diabetic foot care solutions developed in SEBI. So Ms. Chathurani, over to you. And I would like to remind the participants, please take a moment to fill out the feedback. I've already put the link on the chat. And if you have any questions for Ms. Dias, please feel free to text it to me as a chat. Thank you. Over to you.
So thank you very much again. I feel really privileged to be able to present some of the work that I have done with my colleagues in the Center for Biomedical Innovation. So to move into this session, I would like to start from where the previous speakers has explained well about the fundamentals of motion capturing and touched very well on the different technologies that are used, and also the clinical aspect of it both with and without sensors. So in this session, we are going to speak more about a particular parameter, the plantar pressure, or else the foot pressure, that is, or the mechanical pressure felt by the sole of the foot due to the load exerted on it, and how we can use this parameter in different clinical and gait studies. So in this session, we will start by touching on some basics and also the importance of plantar pressure analysis in motion capturing. We will look at some technologies that are already there for this pressure measurement. And we would like to share some of our experience in using plantar pressure measurement in these clinical and gait-related research studies. And of course, let's have a small glimpse at what we can do towards achieving affordable technology in this realm as well. So let's get started. So if we, as I mentioned earlier, plantar pressure is the mechanical pressure that is felt by the sole of the foot. So what we see here is the sole of the foot, and next to it, what we are seeing is the foot imprint. And that shows us which areas of the plantar or the foot sole makes contact with the floor or the contact surface. So the load of the body will be applied on the floor through this contact or area only, and also the ground reaction force will be felt only by this contact area. So if we look at the structure of the foot, the foot has a very complex musculoskeletal structure, and it's formed such that the load exerted on the foot is distributed to different areas in different proportions of that contact area. So because of this, different areas of this foot imprint will actually feel different forces act on, different amounts of forces acting on it, and therefore will feel different levels of pressure. So that gives us the plantar pressure profile, which is seen on this image, which is 1 foot of a person who was standing. So when it comes to the plantar pressure analysis, when a person is standing or sitting or in any stationary posture, the way the load is exerted on their foot will not change, And therefore, we get a static pressure profile and also a static load profile. But when the person is walking, running, engaging in sports, or during any motion, the way the load is exerted, the places where the load is exerted will change from moment to moment. And therefore, what we get is a dynamic pressure profile and a dynamic load profile. So these two categories, the static analysis and the dynamic analysis, are the two main different segments that we encounter when we come to analyze this parameter. So why is plantar pressure important in motion when it comes to motion capturing? So one of the key parameters that the previous speakers explained well about is the ground reaction force, which is a key factor in understanding the causes of motion or the kinematics. As described, the measurement technology requires expensive lab setups and also expensive force plate equipment. The recent research has shown that when we combine the plantar pressure profile data with the acceleration data of motion, we can pretty well estimate the ground reaction force. So this is not just a cost advantage. We can take the ground reaction force estimation out of the lab in sports and apply this to estimate this force in sports and outdoor activities. And when we move into the clinical aspect of things, the load distribution analysis has always been of very high importance in the clinical aspect. For instance, in podiatry, the clinician would look at the load distribution or the plantar pressure distribution of the foot of the person and suggest a different profile to their footwear so that the load distribution changes starting from the plantar, going up to the heel, hip, and even up to the shoulder. So the entire alignment of the body can be adjusted just by analyzing and adjusting the pressure profile. Then the other parameter that we cannot measure with any other method, that is the interface pressure measurement of the foot, of the sole of the foot. So this measurement becomes important in disease conditions where the foot tissues are compromised. For instance, in diabetic patients who have reduced wound healing abilities and reduced quality in their plantar skin. So these are some of the areas why plantar pressure measurement is important when it comes to motion capturing. So let's look at how we can measure the interface pressures. There are a range of sensors and other materials that are available, starting from completely manual methods to electronic methods. So if you look at this first one, the pressure measurement films, they have micro bubbles filled with ink on this film, which burst and make an ink patch at different pressure levels. This method is actually mostly used in measuring the interface pressures between machine parts that come together, such as sealing mechanisms. But researchers have actually tried to use this in trying to plot the plantar pressure as well. And this, the second method, is actually a pneumatic sensor. So this has a air pouch, which is connected to an air sensor through an air tube. This actually gives highly accurate readings because of the use of air sensing. But the challenge is that it would be difficult for us to cover a whole area with pneumatic sensors and try to map the area of the pneumatic sensors would cost too much. So when it comes to measuring the pressure of an area, we usually go for either capacitive sensors or piezoresistive sensors. So, the advantage is that both capacitive and resistive sensors are actually materials. It can be a polymer, it can be a textile, but the main quality is that when pressure is applied, the electrical capacitance or the resistance of that material will change. So a designer has the flexibility to have resistor matrices or capacitive matrices and read all sensors with a single readout circuit when mapping out one area. Moving on from sensors, we can look at the different devices that are developed using these sensors. So we'll again start from the most manual methods and into the electronic methods. The Harris Matte ink imprinting method has been used in the clinical settings for quite some time. So what we have here is actually a rubber grid sodden with ink, and a paper is placed on this rubber grid, and the patient can step on it or else stand on it. And as a result, and what we get as a result is this grid imprint of the foot. But the difference, the improvement in this case is that the rubber grid is formed in such a way that the pressure points would light up more in this imprinting method. So the clinician would not have get an idea about the absolute pressure value of these pressure points, but they would get a subjective idea of where the pressure points are. So a small development from this method is actually the carbon paper method, which is also a little bit similar to the Harris Matte method. Instead of the ink sodden rubber grid, we have a carbon paper, and the intensity of the imprint that the carbon paper will make will depend on the applied pressure. So the imprint will actually come with a scale which gives an approximate pressure value for different carbon paper intensities. So this is slightly quantitative, this a little bit more quantitative than the Harris Matte method. But the choice, the best choice, if we want quantitative measurements, is actually electronic sensors at the moment. So they come in mats or as insoles. Insoles have the versatility that we can insert them into a shoe, and so that we can use them to analyze a wide range of motions, whereas the pressure mats are mostly used in the clinical setting, where the barefoot measurement is the most important one to assess the patient's present condition and the progress. So with that fundamental ideas about pressure measurement, I would like to move on to sharing some of our experience where we try to use this clinical and where we try to use pressure measurement in a biomedical research and product development study. So this project is actually for developing and commercialization of a foot care solution for diabetic patients, and it is funded by the AHEAD Research Commercialization Program. And we have a multidisciplinary team of chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, biomedical engineers, and also clinical experts. And I would like to share our combined knowledge that we gained in this project. So let's start from getting a small understanding about the problem. So long-term diabetic patients begin to develop deformities in their foot structure. And because of that, pressure points or load points where areas where the load is excessively concentrated begin to form in the sole of their foot. In addition, they also develop a condition called a neuropathy, which gives reduced sensations in their feet. So even if they have a pressure point, they would not feel the pain or discomfort of it. And because of this, they will continue in their daily activities, and the tissues will get damaged because of the excess load continuously applied on it. Because of this reason, under the pressure points, the skin will begin to harden, forming a callus. And calluses will not heal because the diabetic patients also develop a condition of ischemia, which reduce the blood supply and reduce the ability to heal wounds. So the calluses can form cracks and get infected. They can form wounds and even progress into ulcers. So when it comes to healing a diabetic wound or an ulcer, the first thing, it cannot be healed with medication alone. So the first thing that needs to be done is, of course, the patient has to control their blood glucose level in order to build the proper environment in their body to heal the wound. And next step is actually to offload that pressure point. So this picture shows a current clinical offloading that is applied in a Sri Lankan wound clinic. And applying this attachment just below below this wound area, what that the clinician is trying to achieve is actually to lift off the wound area from feeling any load from the body. So in our project, what we're trying to do is to develop a better way or more effective way of applying this offloading. So in our work, we have 3 segments where we first engaged in laboratory work, which involves developing a material that is suitable for using in offloading, then modeling that material, and also verification. Next, we move into validating this designed material and also the designed offloading attachment with a preliminary user study under simulated conditions. So we did not apply it directly on diabetic patients yet. And we hope to move into the clinical study in future. So the objectives of offloading that we try to achieve are mainly threefold. Firstly, whatever material and whatever attachment we develop should firstly be able to offload the wound area. And secondly, after applying the offloading, it should not generate additional pressure points in the interface. And thirdly, the patient should be able to maintain healthy gait even with this alteration under their foot. In reality, patients will mostly be prescribed not to walk at all during the wound healing time, but what actually happens is that patients do walk even at least a little bit. So that is why it's also important to ensure that the interface does not have pressure points, and also that the patient can still maintain a healthy gait with the offloading. So with this background knowledge, I'd like to move on to how we started developing the material and where the interface measurement came into play. So the commonly used offloading material are gauze, EVA, and silicone. So we started with a comparison of material properties and identification of the optimal parameters that needs to be there for the new offloading material is actually a water-based gel or a hydrogel. So the next step was, after identifying the optimal parameters that should be there in an offloading material, we try to develop the hydrogel so that it has those parameters. Why we selected this gel other than the existing materials was all other existing materials was able to absorb the pressure. That means they would deform under the load exerted by the foot and reduce the pressure point. But in addition, the water-based gel, because since it has water molecules inside, is able to further redistribute the pressure point after that initial pressure absorption. So in order to be able to verify this, it was mandatory that we need to be able to measure the interface pressure. And that is where we used interface pressure sensor in addition to all the other mechanical tests that we conducted. I would like to quote the study conducted by my colleague on this, where the properties of this material has been further investigated. So after that, a finite element analysis model was further developed. Again, I would like to quote my colleague Ruan Udayananda's work in this. In this finite element analysis model, the conditions that the material was subjected to was changed, and we tried to identify the optimal thickness that this our offloading attachment should have. So, and once that was obtained through the modeling, we synthesized that material with that particular properties and thickness, and then went on to again verify these results with an interface pressure measurement test. So the reason why I shared this with you is to show that this interface pressure measurement in biomedical applications does not only come in the clinical studies with people, but it can also be extended into the material tests and biomechanical tests of non-human studies. So once our laboratory experiments were done, now we wanted to move into a preliminary user study. And in this case, what we did was we identified, since we wanted to move into a user study, we could not do that with patients in one go. The reason is, and because of this, we had to do it with healthy patients under simulated conditions. Again, we used the plantar pressure analysis in order to identify where to place an artificial callus on a healthy person. So for this, we obtained the clinical expertise from our production partner, Align Orthotics, on where it is best to place the artificial callus. So this is the pressure profile after placing the artificial callus, and once under these simulated conditions, we applied the offloading, which is here. It is a EVA insole with a cavity to offload the wound, and also an additional hydrogel lateral wedge. So you can see that the risk area has been successfully offloaded. But so we did these measurements with the pressure mat. And the limitation we had here was we could not test our second objective, that is whether the interface of the foot has developed any pressure points. So for this, we hope to use a carbon paper method in future, which I will describe in brief as well. And also the third objective is to ensure that the patient still has healthy gait. And in order to do that, we hope to incorporate the same study with the IMU measurement. So I would like to briefly touch on our efforts to develop affordable motion capturing in this area. So this is the digitized Harris mat and carbon paper system that we hope to use to measure the interface pressure of that user study. In this one, we have calibrated the carbon paper intensities against the pressure values and digitized so that it's more visual, and also the quantified values are a bit more accurate than assuming it visually. And also this research has started in 2024 in the Department of Electronics and Telecommunication in University of Murray. The other research that has happened in University of Murray includes efforts in developing sophisticated pressure sensor mats, which are high resolution and high sensor density, which can go up to having 30,000 sensors as well. to develop these sensors and their readout systems in Sri Lanka itself. So we have acquired several sensors for cheaper than the actual full system and try to develop it in Sri Lanka itself. So this is a still ongoing research area in University of Moratuwa. And these are some of the efforts in trying to make this useful technology affordable. So thank you very much. And I would, that concludes my session. And I would like to invite any questions from this segment. I'm afraid it's not audible.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dias, for helping us to get into the clinical applications a bit from this motion capturing. And I would like over here to invite Mr. Ruan Udayananda, as she was talking about in the presentation too, to join her here as we take a question. We are running short of time, but I still would just want to raise one question to the two of them. Is Mr. Ruan Udayananda here?
Can you hear?
Okay. Anyways, that's fine. So what were some of the challenges that you faced, actually, especially with the diabetic patients when you were trying to develop this system?
In relation to the offloading material?
Is it relevant to the developing the material? So you have to.
Sorry.
Yeah. Can you a bit more elaborate the question that which field?
Is it in regard to the offloading
yes,
material?
I believe so, yes.
So if I can start with the clinical requirements that were challenging. One thing was that when it comes to, we initially started with an offloading material, but which is able to absorb pressure and also redistribute pressure. But when we moved on to the actual clinical application, there were other requirements as well, whereas the offloading should not obstruct the blood circulation further, and sometimes there was a requirement to have the patient unable to walk, not unable to walk. The restricted walk was not that much of an issue than other problems. So there were different clinical requirements in this domain into the material development. And the other thing I think is the limitations we have in measuring actual patients. It's comparatively easy to take pressure measurements with healthy people, where we can make adjustment to where we place the sensors or sensor materials. But when it comes to actual patients, it would be very difficult to have for them to wear an offloading device and also an interface pressure insert, for instance. So some parameters we will have to project from our external calculations. And that I think is a challenge when it comes to the clinical aspects of the device development. Ruan, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I mostly talk about material that when you look at the solution section, like insoles and this orthotic side, we have to look at these better materials, and we have to look at what are the materials that will minimize or distribute pressure more effectively. So we did several tests on our developed gel material and test their material properties. After that, and next property affecting is that the thickness of the material. So after using the pressure insole, we got some value about this behavior of for a specific thickness, and using a finite element method, we will be able to optimize the system and get the most effective thickness for this application. Okay.
Right. Thank you very much.